I don't have the background, or, who am I? I'm just a stay-at-home mom. But moms get shit done.
We got to address the suburban women problem because it's real.
Welcome to the Suburban Women Problem, a podcast from Red, Wine, and Blue.
Hi, everyone. Thanks for joining us. I'm Rachel Vindman.
I'm Jasmine Clark.
I'm Amanda Weinstein.
And you're listening to the Suburban Women Problem. We've been talking about parents' rights all year on the pod. I think we're going to talk about it for a long time.
Oh, yeah.
Including Red, Wine, and Blue's initiative to counter those extremist voices called the Freedom to Parent 21st Century Kids. But not many politicians have had the courage to wade into those waters. One exception is Congresswoman Elissa Slotkin in Michigan. She's spoken about how we should be a lot more concerned about gun violence than history books.
Oh, yeah.
I'm so excited to share my conversation with her today. And before that, we'll talk to Cara Erskine, a mom in Michigan who had a child at Oxford High School during their tragic school shooting. She's become an inspiring advocate for gun safety laws, but it's honestly infuriating that we keep putting students and parents in this position. Before we get to those interviews, let's just talk. What have you guys been seeing in the news? What have we been talking about in our group chat?
Oh, man. I've seen a lot about where the GOP rhetoric and legislation against LGBTQ people lead us to.
Examples.
So we have the 9-year-old girl with a pixie cut who's being accused of being trans by some random 60-year-old guy at a track meet, and literally stopped the whole track meet, had to be escorted out of the track meet. Awful, just awful.
One of the things that really concerns me about this is that everyone doesn't present in what I guess we consider the cis heteronormative presentation. That doesn't mean they're not cisgendered. It doesn't mean they are LGBTQ. It just means they don't fit into some type of societal checkboxes that say girls look like this.
We used to think that about women who wore pants.
Exactly.
Come on.
And while this story did happen in Canada, I still think that it's a cautionary tale of what can happen here in the United States. It's exactly what we've been saying can happen. You put all these things together and you just have this culture where anytime you don't agree with something, you can just accuse them of being, outside of the norm. And then somehow, if you accuse someone of being outside of whatever is normal to you or to whomever has decided what normal is, then you get to literally persecute that person. Mm-hmm. You get to completely halt an entire track meet, which, to be honest, track meets are long as heck. Like they are hours long. You know how upset I would be?
That should be a crime in and of itself. You pause that track meet and cause all those parents to stay there for an additional half hour.
Oh my gosh.
That's an additional charge. I don't know what that charge needs to say, but it's an additional charge other than the intimidation charge.
I mean, it's insane. Like, I would be so angry. And then, I just think about it. Like, we're talking about a child here.
I know.
We're talking about an older adult that terrorized a child, and what happened to that child will stick with them. Honestly, it's like internet bullying come to life, like in real time, where you've got this person just like going after this kid and all these people are watching and staring. And of course, people came to her aid and her parents were there. But at the same time, like, how horrifying would it be if you're just doing the thing that you're doing the sport that you love, and then all of a sudden someone's like accusing you of, if you're a girl, accusing you of being a boy, and you're like, I'm not a boy. I just want to run.
Yeah. Wanting a birth certificate. Oh, it's like, I wonder where they got the idea of where they need birth certificates for everything.
Yes.
That sounds real familiar. That sounds like familiar rhetoric. And then they also then go after the mom, because it must be the mom's fault for raising this, what they thought was a trans kid, because she happens to have, my understanding is, 2 mothers who are gay.
Right.
And then, of course, the mothers get accused of everything you can imagine,
grooming,
pedophilia, genital mutilation. Like, please, you're the 60-year-old man at a track meet, like watching 9-year-olds.
In a creepy way. They took it very, very far.
Yes.
But the other thing it leads to is, so in Hudson, someone went to a neighbor's house who had a pride flag and set it on fire because apparently he doesn't agree with what that pride flag represents.
Such a freedom fighter, that guy.
I know. So brave of you to go out at night and light that flag on fire in a house where there's children. And
what did that flag do to him, though? Like, seriously, like, what did the flag do to you?
Just existing. Exactly. We just can't, they can't even let it exist. And they can't have a debate without being disagreeable and criminal.
It's crazy.
Mm-hmm. No, it is. I mean, I am offended, I have to say, when I drive by the stupid bumper stickers and the Trump flags. But
you don't light every car on fire?
Yeah, I mean, it lasts for about 3 seconds and then I just go on about my day. Like, what if I did get mad? What would that accomplish for me or anyone else? It wouldn't spur me on to do good things. I do those because I want to make a change. Anything that I do comes from a place of wanting to help, wanting to give people a voice, not because I mean, to me, it's about power. Like last week, I know, Amanda, you mentioned the documentary about the Duggars, Shiny Happy People, but it's not just about the Duggars. It's about the whole movement.
I think it's interesting with that documentary when you see it goes into what you didn't see on the reality show and the things that are really hurting children. And it was common in that organization. And I think it's interesting that you see how unprotected and vulnerable the children in that movement truly are.
Yeah.
And on the flip side, or on, I guess on the same side, I don't know. But then you have the GOP right now consolidating around this protect the children kind of new anthem. Like that's what we are doing.
Yeah.
And then we see the GOP doing stuff like banning free school lunches.
Yes.
That does not protect children.
I think they're really good at coming up with slogans that are like literally the opposite of what they want to do. And it like,
100%.
But it throws you off because it's like moms for liberty. And it's like, actually, we're like totally against liberty. Protect the children. Actually, we are doing everything to not protect children. We are actually harming children.
And I think it's interesting. So then they also so I do love some of my economists that I follow, my economist circles. Then we're like, oh, you want to ban school lunches? Let's talk about that for a second. And they started sharing all of the research we have about how beneficial universal school lunches are. And they're
very educational.
It's so great. Like, oh, yay, economists, good job. But there is new research from NBER from Jesse Hanbury and Sarah Moshery. I hope I'm saying their names correctly. I don't actually personally know them, but this research is amazing that I really liked it. So it shows that when schools offer free meals for everyone, local families reduce grocery spending and large chains respond by dropping prices, meaning that the entire community benefits from having universal school lunches.
I love that. And I think that that's such a good point. So there's the economy side of it, which makes a lot of sense to me. There's also just the fact that, heck, the kids have to be there, feed them. Like, I don't understand why this is such a difficult concept. And what I really don't understand is why the GOP has decided that don't feed the kids is their new campaign slogan. I feel like their slogan is going to be like feed the kids, but somehow that's going to be translated into like not feeding them because that just how they do things.
Oh, they're going to start putting up signs like, at the zoo, it's like, don't feed the bears. They're going to start like nailing in signs everywhere. Don't feed these kids. I know they look hungry. Don't feed them.
Yes.
So right now, Ohio, the state and Senate are doing their budgets. They're having all of the budget fights. And this is one thing that I think is a little like gerrymandering that people don't pay attention to as much. And if you look at our state budget, for example, the state Senate just pulled out everything, and I mean everything that is related to children. So they removed expanded access to free school meals. They removed expanded access to healthcare for pregnant women and children. They removed expanded access to affordable housing.
Even Georgia didn't do that.
Yeah, well, Jasmine, now you're just making me feel worse.
But we're still bad. But we at least kept the Medicaid for pregnant people. Come on now. Jeez.
They stripped out everything. So the Children's Defense Fund has here's all of the things that we would like you to check some boxes on. The Senate pulled out everything. They couldn't check one box that would help support children and their mothers.
But they want to force you to have a baby.
Correct.
I mean, this is just the thing we just have to keep talking about and have to keep. These are the bills that I think are often passed quietly and people do not talk about them. So it's important not only to discuss them, but also to discuss the ramifications of them and how supporting these bills does not support children, does not support the values that they purport to want to strengthen and want to build.
I also will say, because you talked about like talking about these things, the budget is hard because usually the budget is some billions of dollars.
So big.
And they'll stick some great things in there while taking great things out of there.
Yep.
And so when you vote yes, they can say you voted to do this. But then if you vote no, they say you voted against this great thing. And so it really puts politicians in a situation. And I say that as one who was one of the few people in the state of Georgia to vote against Georgia's last budget, because while we had a $6 million surplus compared to what our projections were, they cut $60 million from our higher education budget. Then they put out ads that say that I voted against fully funding public education. Me, really? You really think I don't want to fully fund public education? Like, that's a part of my campaign, and I support public schools 100%. I just don't support all the other stupid stuff y'all did. So budgets are hard.
Yeah. And they know they're doing that. It's a political game, but it's a political game they're playing with us and our children.
Yeah.
You want to protect children. Cool. What's the number one cause of death for children in our country? You want to protect children? Let's talk about the number one cause of their death, gun violence.
And then they're like, oh, no, not that.
You know, unfortunately, our next guest knows all too well the toll that school shootings can take and the lack of will to address gun laws in our country. But she's taken a difficult situation and turned it into advocacy and action, just like a mom. Cara Erskine, thank you so much for joining us today.
Hi.
Every time you tell your story of that day, the day of the Oxford school shooting, it's so powerful. So I was hoping you could walk us through that experience now and what it was like to be a mom to go through that.
Sadly, my story is very common, which is, the problem here in America. I was actually signing the paperwork to move into our new apartment. And so I had my phone off. It was in my car so I could concentrate on the paperwork. And then I get out to my car and it's just the notifications off. And I'm like, what is going on? And I look and I'm trying to play catch up in the group chat with my daughter, her dad, and myself. And then I see we've got an active shooter. This is going on. And I freak the fuck out, right? There's no polite way in saying that. So I get in the car. I am now 45 minutes away from my daughter. And so I'm going through the texts and I see, Mom, we're safe. And they send us a picture of all the kids huddled in the corner, giving a thumbs up, trying to make the parents feel that, we're okay. You don't have to worry about us. We're safe. So I'm rushing there. And on my way to the school is a Michigan State Police hub. And I see all of the state troopers, black unmarked SUVs hauling, all get out, trying to go or going to the high school. I knew where they were going. So I followed them. Like I stayed pretty tight on their heels. And I have one of those cars that will read the text to you. So I'm still getting texts from my daughter. We think there's more than one shooter now. It hasn't been confirmed. And it's just complete chaos. I come running up. She comes running out. And I'm just checking her to make sure that she's all in one piece, that there's nothing actually wrong with her. But she's like, she says she was one of the lucky ones because she's like, Mom, I didn't have to step over any dead bodies. She had friends that did. One of her friends was coming from the bathroom when all of this started, and she saw a friend of hers that was shot. So she started doing CPR and trying to stop the bleed, saw the shooter, played dead, and then once he left, started CPR again. Like, this is not the high school experience.
No.
I'm struck that you said that this is common, that this is so common now that you have dealt with that, and that we have friends who have dealt with it, and we know of communities in our state that have dealt with that. And you are, man, it feels weird saying lucky, but you're lucky that you have your daughter. But it is terrible that she went through the situation. And so can you tell us a lot about this is a hard story to tell. What motivates you to do more and to advocate more and to be out there when this is a hard thing to talk about?
I hate to say that it has to happen to you before you get involved, because everyone's like, oh, it's not my battle. It's not, it could never happen here. But, Oxford is a small country sort of town, right? The kids go hunting at the age of when they're potty trained, kind of. That's a little bit of a exaggeration, but dark humor is kind of how I cope.
You'd fit in well with us.
Right? Yeah. It keeps me from crying.
I think that no mom in the United States today, no matter what your political sort of affiliation, truly believes that this could not happen to them. That's why I think the work that you're doing is so powerful, because when you share your story, very personal, and I know it's very difficult to share that, but when you do it, the power of it is you are talking about every mom's biggest fear, and you are telling what happened when their biggest fear happened to you and describing it.
Exactly.
And that's why, advocacy is really important. And that kind of call to activism and that you are giving people is so strong, because you are saying, this did happen to me. And if you don't want it to happen to you, you need to speak out and you need to get involved. And I just want to thank you for what you do, because I don't know if you're aware, but like how powerful it is, but the personal story is why it's so powerful, because it is all our fear, and it is no one thinks that it can't happen to them.
Which is sad, but also powerful, because that's getting the momentum moving, right?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I don't think we would have passed our we've got 3 laws passed of common sense gun reform in Michigan now. It's the red flag laws, the secure background checks, and then safety storage requirements. And I don't think that would have happened in Michigan if it weren't for the additional shooting of MSU. Like, people had started it off after Oxford, but not enough people jumped in, right? There wasn't enough body, because they're like, oh, well, I don't have the background, or I don't have any formal education, or, who am I? I'm just a stay-at-home mom. But moms get shit done. And that's what it took for Michigan to get through and get our legislation passed.
So, when you were telling your story, Cara, as a mom, I went through something slightly similar very recently.
Mm-hmm.
There wasn't, or they got the kid before anyone actually was hurt. But I basically got the text message from my son that said, hey, Mom, there's a situation at my school.
And your heart drops.
And my son lives in Maryland and I live in Georgia.
Ugh.
So I went through this moment of like, okay, now what can I do? And what am I doing? And why do I feel like in this moment I'm failing as a parent? Because for whatever reason, my child is not safe in this moment. And so I completely understand where you're coming from. And I appreciate that you're advocating. And I hate that it did take 2 incidences for people to kind of say, okay, this isn't once in a lifetime. Like, this stuff is happening way too often. So now we've got to really do something. I wonder how you have been able to counter this idea that the people who are pushing for these laws, we're not anti-gun.
Mm-hmm.
You've had this awful experience, but you were also in the Air Force.
Yes.
And your mother was a police officer.
Yep.
So How do you approach those who try to paint you as anti-gun instead of pro-gun reform?
So anytime I get out to speak publicly, one of the things that I always end up leading with it, and I do a lot of at the school board as well. I'm always getting up and speaking at the school board. And I'm like, look, I'm a US veteran. I'm coming to you as a veteran, as a concerned person from the community. As I also used to be on the Ferndale Auxiliary Police Department. So I was that as well. My mom is a police officer, like you said. And I own 2 firearms, but they're locked up. They're put away safe. Most of the people that are, let's say, on the far right that I've spoken with, and my key is to have one-on-one conversations with them. And I usually tend to get, this is a hard boundary for me. I don't want to get into this. And I'm like, no. I said, this isn't like, we're not going to debate or anything. I'm just curious what you think it means when I say common sense gun reform. And they're like, oh, you're coming to take away the guns. I'm like, absolutely not.
Right.
So I am curious. So you're also a therapist. So you wear all of these hats. And I know I was actually surprised as a parent when our kids sat down with our Congresswoman. And one of the first things they talked about is that they were really worried about guns in their school. And I didn't quite, it's not a conversation I actually have with my kids regularly. And I didn't realize it was as top of mind for them as it is. So I'm wondering, from your perspective as a therapist, how do we deal with the epidemic of gun violence in this country? And how do you think it's affecting our kids?
It's having a massive impact. Another story, my daughter works at a local restaurant here, probably 6 to 8 months after the shooting. They, on Sundays, they have this magician sort of person come in and do all these like balloon animals and magic tricks and stuff. A balloon popped. Her and her another friend dropped to take cover, because it's such that fight, flight, or freeze in there, especially after an event like this. And then they were so dysregulated. They were in the bathroom trying to like calm their nervous system, breathe and stuff, so they could go back out there and start taking orders. So they're highly affected.
Yeah, it's like a chronic state of stress.
So Cara, I want you to tell our listeners what they can do, how they can make a difference. In Michigan, you guys have made a difference and you've passed some powerful legislation. Unfortunately, it's been born,
Michigan.
It's been born out of a lot of tragedy.
Yes.
But we don't want to get to that point. None of us want to get to that point. But what can our listeners do, or what are things that you tell people that they can do?
So to get involved, find your local red, wine, and blue. If there's not one there, reach out to the closest state, call Everytown, find the local Moms Demand Action, and be a part. Like, you don't have to have a PhD.
Mm-hmm.
You can just get involved. We need bodies to pester the legislators, right? To go up to the Capitol and kind of, bombard them with, hey, what are you guys doing? Why did you vote no on this? And hold them accountable, sending those emails, making the phone calls. And there's tons of scripts out there. If you feel intimidated and don't know how to phrase something just right, or, something like that, that's not what it's about. It's just making that first call and to get involved. More than likely, you're not alone. You might feel alone, like, oh, no one else really cares about this. But man, that's something that after the shooting here in Oxford, there's a whole group of lovely moms that I meet with, and a handful of dads as well, that are getting together, that want to get stuff done and push through and brainstorm. And then we're also there for support for each other, which is just fabulous. And every one of them had said, prior to the shooting, I thought I was alone.
Yeah. We hear so many people who think that they are the only ones, and then they realize they're not. And from that, and just getting together and finding courage and finding your voices together, really good things can happen and movement can happen. And Cara, thank you so much for joining us. Thank you for sharing your story. Thank you for sharing a plan of action for us, because I think there's a lot of power in both of those things. And for, of course, all the work that you do.
Thank you for having me. I've enjoyed this. And I mean, I'm a big fan of red wine and blue, so I'm a little biased.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you so much.
Well, that was quite the personal story.
I think it's very important for people to tell their stories. I think that one hit a little closer to home for me just because of some things that have happened with my own child. And so, but I mean, just the idea of like, when she finally saw her daughter, just like touching her and just making sure that like everything was okay. Like I could literally feel myself in her shoes.
I remember one fall leading in the back to school ads, there were, I can't remember, some social media was like, hey, it's back to school time. We've got bulletproof backpacks that you can buy.
It makes me want to vomit.
And I was like, this is terrible. I have to buy a bulletproof backpack for the hope that that might be the one thing that stands between life and death for my kid. Then that means that my kid is not protected at school. That means my kid is not protected at church or the synagogue or at a concert. My kid is not protected. So like, again, going back to like hearing the GOP say they want to protect children, I'm sorry, but it's falling just a little bit flat.
Oh, for sure.
It's just so insincere. And I think any reasonable thinking person can see that. But what we have to get around is the aspect of power. I mean, I think that's what we're up against so much, is this aspect of power. And there are, as Cara mentioned, so many more people who feel the way we do, but we have to find a way to reach them. And sometimes that's reaching them with messaging that actually gets through, through that skin of misinformation that's been fed to them.
Right.
And we have to find a way to do that. The best way, I think, is to continue to share stories, and we give people permission to question things that they haven't maybe ever.
Yeah.
Well, we're going to take a quick break right now. When we come back, we'll have my conversation with Michigan Congresswoman and Senate candidate Elissa Slotkin.
Can you believe it's been a year since the Supreme Court took away our reproductive rights? We can't either. But you know what we can believe is how much this community has stepped up to work together on behalf of our daughters, our friends, and each other. So we want to celebrate this momentum by coming together to share stories with one another of how we've found our voices since Roe. We'll be joined by special guest Amanda Zarowski, who bravely shared her story in front of the Senate about how she almost died because of anti-abortion laws in her home state of Texas. We invite you to join Amanda and the Red Wine and Blue community this Thursday, June 22nd at 7:30 p.m. Eastern as we come together to keep this momentum going and defeat extremism. For more information and to RSVP, you can click the link in the show notes.
Our guest today is a US Congresswoman from the great state of Michigan. Before entering politics, she worked for the CIA and the Department of Defense. And this February, she announced her run for Senate. Elissa Slotkin, thank you so much for joining us on the Suburban Women Problem.
Of course. Thanks for having me.
It is absolutely our pleasure. Before you ran for office, you worked in defense and intelligence. I think you worked with one of my favorite people, my husband. He says only the best things about you. I can tell he really likes you because I know which of his compliments he reserves for the people that he really likes. And these are the things he says about you. So you did 3 tours in Iraq as an intelligence analyst. What inspired you to dedicate your life to public service?
Well, I'm what's called a 9/11 baby, right? I was someone who was already interested in international affairs, and frankly, international development was my focus for my first couple of years out of college. But I happened to be on my second day of grad school in New York City on 9/11. I just moved to the city. I was in some sort of like remedial economics class. And I walked out of the class at Columbia, and a guy I'd met at orientation said, "It's so weird. A little plane, I guess, just hit the World Trade Center." And that kicked off a day that, most people remember where they were and who they were with and what they were doing, right? It's a generational event. And for me, by the time the smoke cleared that day, I knew I was going to go into national security. And I literally switched my concentration in grad school, went into international security policy, got recruited by the CIA right out of grad school. And within my first year at the CIA, was on my first tour in Iraq alongside the military. So the events of 9/11 were deeply formative for my professional life.
I love that. And you have continued to serve in many different capacities. I knew I wanted to have you on the pod when I heard you talking about how if we really care about kids, we should focus less on book bans and more on gun safety.
Yeah.
I love that. It's so simple and so true. But so far, a lot of politicians have been really afraid to touch the whole parents' rights issue. Why is that something you wanted to speak on? And why do you think so many politicians are unwilling to touch that subject?
Well, I mean, look, I unfortunately became the first congresswoman in America to have 2 school shootings in her district.
Yeah.
Right. Oxford High School, November of 21, Michigan State University, February of 2023. And, I have served 3 tours in Iraq. I carried, a weapon. I went to all the trainings and the combat medicine and on all those things and saw terrible things out in Baghdad. But I have to say that school shootings for me rank right up there with some of the worst things I've ever seen or had to deal with. And it's because the same problems that we were dealing with in a war zone are now being handled in our schools. And I find myself, when you go to funeral after funeral and vigil after vigil, when you're sitting with a group of 14-year-olds and they're describing this, like, how they're hyper aware and hyper vigilant, how they can't stand to be in crowds. They're describing the same PTSD that I saw in people who I served with in Iraq.
Yeah.
And I'm having to explain what PTSD is and the symptoms of it because their brain chemistry has changed temporarily because of trauma. And when you do that with teenagers, with people who were just, parents who are just sending their kids off to school, I challenge anyone to go into that situation and come out an unchanged person.
Yeah.
And so it became a passion project for me. And I grew up with guns, right? I grew up, my family farm, like I said, carried a Glock and an M4 in 3 tours in Iraq. I'm not a, anti-Second Amendment person.
Yeah.
But there is this totally and utterly fake contradiction or, this fake choice, excuse me.
Yeah.
Between like, I'm a gun owner or I care about keeping my children safe in schools. So I think for me, so number one, that issue really personally affected me. And then to your question, I think we all know that coming out of COVID, there is this concept in American society of parental rage.
Yes.
Right? There is a lot of parental rage. It's just being vectored on the wrong things. It's being misdirected into these manufactured culture war things. A book never shot a single child, Teaching Black history does not threaten our children. Being inclusive as a society is not a physical threat to our children. Gun violence and the diseases of despair are physical threats to our children. And as a security professional, I'm not going to mealy mouth threats. That's what I have done, is try and prevent threats my whole life. So I'm not going to mealy mouth it or be concerned about saying these things. And I don't know why, I think people are scared of that parental rage. And what I say is, instead of being scared of it, let's vector it onto the things that are truly threatening our kids.
I couldn't agree more. I think we're seeing people who try to co-opt and use this idea of parental rage, and it's really blowing back in their faces because even their own constituency is saying, that's not what we meant. We didn't want this. This is not what we wanted. I mean, yeah, we're upset, but not this. I'm not sure that they can pivot as quickly as they need to actually capture what they want for the reasons they want. But I guess we'll see.
Yeah.
We often talk on our podcast about Michigan as a success story.
Ooh.
In last year's midterms, Democrats won a trifecta in the House, the Senate, and the governor's seat.
Yeah.
And we've been really just so inspired by what Michigan Democrats have been able to get done as a result on abortion, on gun safety, on so many issues. Why do you think Michigan Democrats won up and down the ballot last year?
Look, I think, first of all, it's important to remember that 6 years ago today, Michigan had a Republican governor, attorney general, secretary of state, House, Senate, Supreme Court, and congressional delegation, and we had just voted for Trump. So, this has been a process over the last 6 years.
Yeah.
It wasn't just this last election. We did a lot through ballot initiatives because we couldn't get anything through our legislature. And I encourage anyone listening to ask that question in your state. What can I do if you live in a red state, what can I do through a ballot initiative that I can't get through my legislature? We got rid of political gerrymandering, expanded the right to vote, all while we still had a Republican legislature. So the most important thing that we did is we had a plan. And I think this is the difference between being a Democrat in a swing state or a red state and being a Democrat in a super blue, all Democratic area. Good intentions are not good enough. You have to have a plan for the era that we live in. And we had a plan. And that's why you saw when we got the leak a year ago that Roe was going to be overturned, Michigan had a ballot proposal already ready, already cleared through the lawyers, ready to go. And we got 800,000 signatures in 8 weeks. It's nearly 1 out of every 10 Michiganders, so that we could get Roe on our ballot and then voted for it and codified it, right? So if we had just been sitting there and said, oh, woe is me, we're about to lose the right to an abortion here because we're a full ban state, or we were, then we'd be living in a state right now where you can't have, a safe DNC, right, for a miscarriage. So it's having a plan and executing with some logic and data behind that plan. And that would be a lesson I think the whole Democratic Party could learn from right now.
Could you share just a little bit more about the next steps for some of the progressive legislation we're seeing? And what do you think next year looks like in Michigan?
I think it's very interesting what's gone on in the Michigan legislature. I call it a tale of two Senates. We have the Michigan Senate, where we have a 1-seat majority for Democrats. We have the US Senate, where we have a 1-seat majority for Democrats. And the differences between these two Senates are stark. In the Michigan Senate, we are spending that majority. We are legislating at a serious clip, right? Everything from codifying Roe, protections, gun violence or gun safety legislation, protecting LGBTQ folks, reversing right to work so that our unions are more competitive in Michigan. I mean, we did a blitz in the first 100 days, whereas the US Senate, frankly, mostly because of the filibuster, really isn't legislating very often. So the stuff that we really need to focus on now is thinking about how we fund education and how we make sure we're handling the funding of our schools correctly, how we invest in job training so that all of our great young people are ready to go into all the jobs we have available. And in Michigan, we have a ton of advanced manufacturing and skilled trades where you can make a lot of money. You just need a little bit of training. I think all of those things are on the docket. Mental health. It is just so clear that we had a crisis of mental health issues before COVID, and now it's off the charts. And for all of these key professions, we have shortages: teachers, mental health professionals, nurses, fire and first responders, and police. So how do we make sure that Michigan, is supporting the young people who want to go into those professions? And we have some proposals on that. So all of those things, I think, are on the docket for the next year. And I think the big one, the governor just announced it at one of our big bipartisan conferences, is, how do we attract more young people to stay in Michigan, and how to bring more people in. And that means attracting other young people, but also immigration, just being very matter of fact that we need immigrants in this country, legal, vetted immigration. And Michigan does especially. So those things are all on the docket for the next year and a half or so.
Well, it sounds very exciting. And I'd love to hear you as a federal office holder talk about what's going on in your state. I think a lot of people find it to be like, two parallel tracks, and it's not. I mean, you go to Washington and you represent your district, and hopefully you represent the state of Michigan in a little while, but that you also are entirely plugged in to what's going on in your home state and helping the legislature there pass the bills that will also help Michiganders on a different level. And I think sometimes that's gotten a little lost, is how groups work together, but we are excited to see what happens in Michigan. As I mentioned, I'm living in Florida right now, where we do not have a Democratic trifecta. Maybe you heard, to put it lightly. Yeah. So what can other states, learn from Michigan besides, I think you had a plan and you worked for it and you elected people, but what do you think Michigan did to tap into this idea? You had a Republican governor, you voted for Trump. Like, what kind of tipped the balance and made people change their minds?
Well, look, I mean, there's no doubt about it. We were helped by the growing extremism on the other side. I mean, some of this, I think the Democrats have done an amazing job in Michigan, but we also were running against some people who were expressing views that maybe very loud base voters liked on their side, but the average Michigander just could not handle. So I think highlighting that and being able to show that to that practical Midwestern voter was very important. But I think a couple other things. Number one, that mobilization of voters is in Michigan, it's a combination. It's getting out base voters, hardcore Democrats in our cities, especially, and making sure voter turnout is strong. Yeah. But it's also persuading voters in our small towns, in our suburbs, who are swing voters, who are independent voters, who are moderate Republican voters, to vote for a Democrat. And in Michigan, it's just math. Yeah. You cannot win elections just on base Democratic voters. So it's understanding that and going into the equation that way. And that means you have groups and organizations that focus on turnout and registering young voters and making sure people go to the polls. But you also have folks who know how to go into really red areas, show up in places where Democrats have not been in like 40 years, and what I tend to do pretty well, which is lose better in red areas, right? You lose better. So instead, and people didn't understand the night of the election in November, this past November, we had some press there, and every 30 minutes, my campaign manager would get up on stage and be like, make all the announcements of the totals that came in. And she'd say, guess what, guys? We lost Shiawassee County with 43% of the vote or whatever it was. And there'd be a cheer from the crowd. And we lost this town by 2 points, and there'd be a cheer. And all the press is like, what is going on? Why are you cheering?
Do you guys understand math?
Yes. And we were like, we're losing better than the average Democrats. So we know we're going to win as the night goes on. So I don't know that Democrats always do such a good job of actually going out to red areas and showing up when a lot of people may not love you there. You got to have a thick skin.
My former district, my representative was Abigail Spanberger, and she's pretty good at that too.
The great Abigail. She is.
She talks about stories. I heard her speak last year of just walking up to, a group of rural farmers, like sitting around having coffee one morning and just, let's talk about it. Let's unpack this. Yeah. Like sometimes you just have to come through but you have to meet people where they are and talk to them and not be afraid of it. Yeah. Frankly, I think women are pretty darn good at that. If I might say so myself.
Yeah, I think that's true.
Well, given all the progressive wins last year, it might be easy to assume that Michigan Democrats have an easy path in 2024, but we can't take any seat for granted, and that includes the one you're running for. What do you want everyone to know before the 2024 election, not just in Michigan, but everywhere?
I think that, we need to learn from the recent past and remember that just because We think something seems obvious. We think it's clear that, maybe the people listening to your show here don't think that Donald Trump could win another national election, or that election deniers, extreme types couldn't win. Doesn't mean they can't win. It just means we all live in our own, we call them silos of excellence.
Yeah.
Right. Where we talk to our people, and you have to really realize that we are kind of in an echo chamber of our own making.
Yeah.
And just like no one expected maybe Donald Trump to win in 2016, those wins are still possible.
Yeah.
Right. And then secondly, that I challenge everyone listening, if you're a part of a Democratic organization or a nonpartisan, but, vote engagement organization, ask them what the plan is. Have the leadership explain in numbers how you're going to get to your goal. It is important that we push ourselves to be more strategic.
Yeah.
And I think that only makes us stronger. And certainly for Michigan, I'm glad we are so proud of all of our wins, but there's not one Michigander who feels like this is permanent. The minute you sleep on Michigan, it wants to move back and vote for a moderate Republican. So it takes work to keep it up, not just to get there.
Yeah. No, I completely agree. And I know you are an expert in several countries with authoritarian backgrounds and authoritarian leaders. And the thing is like every election that we have, I think for the rest of my lifetime, is going to be either securing democracy or a step towards authoritarianism, hopefully a small step. But I mean, it doesn't have to be the case. We have to take the threat real, and we can't take anything for granted, for sure.
Yeah, I think as someone who has studied other countries for a living, you often talk about these like lost decades or decades of political instability, where people inside the country are so turned against each other that nothing moves, nothing changes, nothing moves forward. There's really no progress. It's sort of stuck. And I think we are in one of those decades of political instability. I put us at about 6 years in. That's how I wake up in the morning. But in that decade, we just have to do a better job of protecting our rights and our democracy. It just has to be, you have to be more vigilant. We have to play more offense and stop playing this like weak, shallow defense we often play on things like choice or other rights. And so, I do think we'll get out of it. I am actually very hopeful. I hope Michigan serves as a hopeful example that you can, I tell people we didn't just flirt with extremism. We had a full-blown affair, a torrid affair, and now we regret it, and we're making up for it. But, we will get through this era, but it's going to take engaged citizens and principled leaders. Like it takes a few important things. It means people doing a little bit more than they're used to doing, and then principled leaders ready to receive the ball and do something about it.
Oh, I love it. Wow. Thank you so much. That was just amazing. We do have to end every interview with some rapid fire questions. So Are you ready?
I'm ready.
Okay. What is one food that our listeners have to try if they visit Michigan?
Grilled salami.
Oh, wow.
On the barbecue.
Very Slavic of you. Okay. So what do you do for self-care?
Well, I spend a lot of time on my family farm, which is very quiet with my dogs, a lot of acres, and a lovely antidote to Washington.
Perfect. What piece of legislation are you most proud of?
There's a number of them, but the one that I feel all the time is the PACT Act, which expanded. It's personal to me, right? It was about all those Iraq and Afghanistan veterans who were exposed to burn pits, in their tours and combat zones, and who are now experiencing a bunch of weird symptoms and early cancers. And we passed legislation that gave another 3.5 million younger veterans full access to the VA. Every veteran listening should go and register with the VA before August 1st. Get your intake. It's very quick, so that you're registered. And all you have to do is prove that you served in a war zone. That's it.
And if you're listening and you know someone who served and they haven't registered, make sure they go register.
Yes.
It's great PSA, and tell everyone you know. All right. That's the end of our rapid fire questions. Where can people go to find out more about you and your work?
That's a great question. We have a website. I think it's Elissa from Michigan.
Okay.
I should know this by heart.
It's okay.
We'll
put it in the show notes. We'll have it right.
There we go. Thank you. I should know it. But thanks for the time and thanks for having me.
Yeah, it's been such an honor to talk to you. And thank you for joining me on the Suburban Women Problem.
Of course. Have a great one.
Welcome back, everyone. So, Rachel, I loved your interview with Elissa Slotkin. I think she brought up a lot of good things, but one of the things that really kind of resonated with me, and Cara talked about this as well, is this idea that our students, our kids, our children are basically experiencing the same PTSD that people who have served in actual war zones have experienced.
I was so impressed with the Congresswoman and so impressed that she talks about this. And I know for a fact, when she talks to people, she talks about the parental rage issue. And we need more people that are willing to wade into that water, as I said earlier, and talk about this stuff. It's really important. And I was so impressed with her. I hope for good things for Michigan and her Senate candidacy.
We need our elected officials to pass legislation that actually helps us rather than talking points that don't have anything to do with us. And to do that, you have to have the conversations and know what people are talking about. What are people talking about day to day? What are their biggest concerns day to day? And that can sometimes be hard for some elected officials who aren't doing that. So it says a lot when someone can do that.
I'm just going to say she's a woman, and I think that matters.
I mean, she's got an unfair advantage.
No, it's a good point. It is a good point, though. I think that for so long, we've heard that women won't make good leaders because of X, Y, and Z. But I really, truly believe that there are a lot of excellent leaders that also happen to be women. But it's not just it's not an aside. It is, they are excellent leaders because they are women and they pursue leadership in a way that just engulfs everyone and makes sure that everyone is taken care of. Because that's what women, and as I won't say especially, but women and moms do. Like, we want to make sure that people are taken care of. And so I think it's a leadership style that is lacking a lot of times when all of the leaders look exactly the same and they all have Y chromosomes.
I know. And Michigan's got a lot of these strong women.
Oh my goodness.
That, like, so many. Like, come on, Michigan, share the wealth.
I know. You get a little bit.
So on that note, we are going to end with something. It's been a bit of a heavy episode. We do like to end with a toast to joy, something positive. But I do think there are positive aspects of this episode, just some heavy ones too. But there is some hope. Anyway, we're going to end on a toast to joy. And Amanda, what is your toast to joy this week?
Love that. Only light can battle the dark. So here is my little bit of light. My toast of joy today is, so we're coming off of Father's Day. So I do want to do a toast of joy to all of the dads in my life, which includes Dan and Mikey and my husband, Casey, who we took him to Cedar Point, which was 10 hours of fun for him and 10 hours of me standing there. But it's fine. It's fine. He had a really great day and the kids loved it. But it was a whole bunch of fun seeing Cedar Point, and he just gets to go have fun with the kids and go on all the rides. And
do you not get on rides?
No, I hate rides. I like food though. I can tell you what, I had some funnel cake fried shrimp that were amazing. Fried fish that I think was walleye that came out of Lake Erie, also amazing. And those were my two favorite things about Cedar Point.
Gotcha. I love that.
All right. Jasmine, what is your toast to joy?
All right. So we are actually celebrating several holidays this weekend. And so along with Father's Day, this weekend, several communities celebrated Juneteenth. And so I got an opportunity to speak at one of the Juneteenth celebrations in downtown Atlanta at Centennial Park. It was an amazing event, thousands of people. And I was speaking at this event, and I'm going to tell y'all a secret. I did not prepare remarks. They asked me to speak like earlier in the week, and I was like, yeah, sure, I'll do it. And then as I was walking up there, I was like, I'm not exactly sure what I'm going to say, but I've talked about legislation plenty of times. I've got this. And so we get there, and the guy that I'm speaking with, one of my colleagues, he's like, hey, I got an idea. Let's just basically give an intro, tell people who we are, tell people what we do, and then let's get them to ask us questions, and we can just answer their questions right on the spot. And I was like, oh, I don't know, but all right, let's do it. And we got some amazing questions, and it just kind of like reinvigorated me. It like reminded me of why I decided to go into politics in the first place and why it matters to actually talk to people. So first, happy Juneteenth, but also an amazing festival experience for me. Also had some great festival food as well. There was so much food at that festival. All right. So Rachel, what is your toast to joy?
Well, my toast to joy is this week is I have some alone time. I have big plans to celebrate my dog's, the puppy's first birthday.
Happy birthday, puppies.
But just some time alone to work and reflect on some things. I have some plans that I want to do and a lot of work I want to get done. And I'm really grateful to have this time to do that. It is exceedingly rare, I would say, not just very rare, but exceedingly rare that I have so much time to kind of concentrate on my work. I usually have to get it in between drop off and pick up and other things going along. But since it's summer, those aren't limiting factors. So I have some real ambitious goals. So I will report back next week and let you know if any of this was accomplished. But I have high hopes at this point.
That's exciting.
I love it. I need to do a writer's retreat because I'm writing a chapter in a book. And yeah, I haven't done it yet, but I definitely need to do it. So being all by myself would be great. But yeah, it doesn't really happen often for me either.
We should do an episode on just the strategy of getting stuff done. Maybe if we can ever break out of our activism, maybe we'll have time to do a self-help podcast.
The world would stop burning for just a second so we can talk about fun things.
My goodness. There's actually a lot of truth to this, but again, for a different episode. Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We're still collecting personal stories about how the fall of Roe motivated us to get involved. So if you have a story to share, we'd love to hear it. You can submit it at go.redwine.blue/Dobbs. And tomorrow night, we'll actually be coming together to share some of those stories. If you want to join us for a community event where you can hear inspiring stories of ordinary women taking action and changing history, you can visit our events page at redwine.blue/events, or you can check out the link in our show notes. Thanks again for listening, and we'll see you next week on another episode of The Suburban Women Problem.
The Suburban Women Problem was created by Red, Wine, and Blue. Our producer and editor is Amy Thorstensen, and our project manager is Lindsay Quist. Videos by Abigail Martin and Ashley Hufford. For more information about upcoming events and trainings, or to learn more about Red, Wine, and Blue, follow us on social media or at www.redwine.blue.